If there was ever a man hungrier for power than Prince Meleh of Armenian Cilicia, then I would like to meet him. A man willing to go to every extreme to achieve his lofty ambitions is perhaps the most dangerous kind of person. Meleh would prove that, all while nearly destroying everything his brother fought so hard to build. Meleh was born a prince, although he was the youngest of 4 brothers, fated never to rule Cilicia. He had seen the highs and lows of Leo's reign as well as Thoros's. By the end of his brother Thoros's reign, Meleh was an experienced and successful warrior. Where Thoros's health declined, Meleh was only entering his prime. The throne was all but his as long as he outlasted the sonless Thoros, until the aged king finally had a boy in 1165. This would ruin Meleh's long-awaited chance to rule Cilicia. Something had to be done. The brooding Meleh waited for a time. Infants in the medieval world were not always guaranteed an adult life. After a year, the child still lived. In 1166, Thoros the Great left Cilicia on a diplomatic mission to Jerusalem. His absence provided a perfect opportunity to plot against Thoros. He told a few loyal followers his plans to murder his brother. But not all these men were loyal. The secret slipped, and when Thoros arrived, he was almost immediately informed of his brother's intentions. Meleh still asked his brother to go on a hunting trip. Thoros just smiled and accepted. Before Meleh could make his move, Thoros had him arrested. The last of their litter, Thoros could not bear to kill his brother. He made a rare mistake and chose to exile Meleh. The exiled Rubenid chose to go east, directly into the lands of Nur ad-Din, the son of Zengi and the most powerful bulwark against the Crusades. Thoros and Meleh had both chosen to not engage him while they were part of a Crusader coalition. The rest of their party fought anyway and were terribly beaten. This was exactly the kind of person Meleh needed if he was to one day become Prince of Cilicia. The traitorous Meleh arrived in nearby Aleppo in good time. Nur ad-Din took in this ambitious Rubenid on the condition that he convert to Islam. Meleh agreed, abandoning the apostolic faith of his people. Not only this, but he also abandoned his vows as a member of the Knights Templar, truly making him a rival to the Westerners. After pledging his allegiance to the Emir of Aleppo, Meleh was given the governorship over Cyrus province, directly bordering his homeland. Fighting his brother on the battlefield would be nothing if not a mistake. His ability to defend the mountains of Cilicia was something to behold. But the last time Meleh saw his brother, he was becoming an old and exhausted man. So the younger Meleh bided his time. It only took a year for Thoros to abdicate his throne and become a monk, leaving his 5-year-old son as the Lord of the Mountains. The child's maternal grandfather would become the regent, a French-born man named Thomas, and a crusader by trade. Meleh descended on Cilicia at the head of a mostly Turkish army. He began looting the countryside and killing his countrymen. Through all his efforts, he could not break through the mountain fortresses, however. This was only a delay for the wrathful Meleh. Soon after, the Rubenid returned with a larger force and proper siege equipment. This persuaded most of the Armenian nobility to surrender and recognize Meleh as their liege lord of the mountains. Eventually, all of Cilicia fell to its first and only Muslim ruler of Armenian Cilicia. As old Armenia fell to the Seljuks, so too did New Armenia, although there was still a Rubenid wearing the crown. For a time, Meleh was able to coexist with his 5-year-old nephew that he had deposed. After all, he never asked for any of this. However, in 1170, Meleh exiled Thomas the Regent and ordered his men to kill his brother's child. With that, not many Rubenids remained to challenge Meleh, and he finally became the Lord of Cilicia, having to wait a medieval lifetime to do so. Although Cilicia was finally in his clutches, not all of the Armenians were. To the west, Meleh's lamp-printed cousins were still a vassal of the Byzantines. With Aleppo supporting him, it was time to reawaken the old rivalry. Meleh besieged Lampron Castle, devastating the enemy countryside in his usual and cruel manner. After nearly a year of a grueling siege, Lampron Castle withstood another Rubenid attempt at a takeover. After this, Meleh reared his army around to test an old friend. The former Templar attacked the organization in the land that they controlled in Alexandretta, a place Antioch and Cilicia had been fighting over for decades. Here, Meleh drove his fellow knights into Antioch, ruining the countryside behind him and retaking the Alexandrettian Bay. Before the land-hungry Meleh could continue farther into Antioch, he was suddenly forced to a halt. The king of Jerusalem, along with his large army, blocked the path. King Amalric took Meleh to the peace table. Here he was able to prevent the invasion of Antioch from the Crusader state's new Muslim-ruled rival. Meleh was always looking for war, but he wasn't stupid enough to take on the hegemon of Jerusalem. Not yet sated, Meleh reared his army around yet again, continuing along the Cilician plains. As Meleh had assisted Thoros in conquering the coast, he would again find success, taking Mamistra and Sis with ease before arriving at Tarsus. Here, the Byzantine governor of Cilicia, Constantius Kalamanos, hid behind his walls. Meleh eventually committed the garrison to surrender by means of siege. Governor Kalamanos was captured and sent to Meleh's liege, Nur ad-Din. The Byzantine was held hostage and released after a large ransom. His gamble to support Meleh was working out better than he could have planned. By this point, it had only been a year, and Meleh had brought Armenian Cilicia back to a point not seen since the early reign of Thoros the Great, making plenty of enemies with all of his neighbors, besides Nur ad-Din, that is. King Amalric had already dealt with the Cilician question once, but he had only put a band-aid over an infection from within. To subdue the mutual threat sandwiched between them, the Crusader states and the Byzantine Empire entered into a rare alliance. This coalition army may have been able to crush Meleh into submission, but they would never find out. Just before the Byzantines and Crusaders crossed into Cilicia, Nur ad-Din hit the Kingdom of Jerusalem much closer to home. This, combined with the rise of the powerful Saladin in Egypt, forced King Amalric to defend his own realm. Meleh had dodged a bullet yet again. Safe in his mountains, Meleh continued pestering Christian interests in the Holy Land. In the year of the botched invasion, the ambitious Armenian captured a Frankish nobleman from the west, Count Stephen of Sancerre, a man invited to Jerusalem as a possible husband for King Amalric's daughter. For whatever reason, Stephen declined the marriage proposal. On his way back home, his entourage passed through Armenian Cilicia. Perhaps ignorant to the new Muslim lord, Meleh captured the count. The king of Jerusalem eventually paid his would-be son-in-law's ransom, but he was plain tired of Meleh's persistence. In 1173, with the kingdom of Jerusalem in a safe enough spot, Amalric again marched to Cilicia, an army behind him. This time he was not prevented from crossing the Antiochian border, nor was he faced with the Turco-Armenian army. Meleh had a chance to defeat King Amalric in battle, but why risk it while Jerusalem sat so exposed? It would only be a matter of time before Amalric returned to his holy city. He raided the plains of Cilicia for a few months before he was ready to endure embarrassing peace talks. Amalric gained nothing besides Meleh's word, which doesn't mean a whole lot if you're telling him to stop making war. In exchange, the Armenian prince gained more land along the Alexandrettian Bay. With one half of the anti-Meleh coalition brought to an anticlimactic end, there was still, as always, the threat from Constantinople. Meleh invaded Byzantium, pressing his attack west and then north, positioning his force so that the armies of Byzantium could not combine their vassal in Lampron. Emperor Emmanuel, the lifetime rival of the Rubinids, appeared plain tired of his many attempts to seize Cilicia. He quickly made peace with Meleh. Again, the Muslim Armenian achieved more at the negotiating table than his brother ever could. He gained the bit of land he had taken, cutting off the Armenians of Lampron for the foreseeable future. More importantly, he was recognized as a legitimate ruler by Emperor Emmanuel himself. Not as a prince, however, but with the title of Baron. With the Byzantine rank on paper, Meleh was a vassal of Emperor Emmanuel, a rank he accepted on his benefit only, and definitely not the Byzantines. In 1174, the powerful sponsor of Meleh, Nur ad-Din, perished after achieving some 30 years of a dominating reign. So too did King Amalric in Jerusalem. In a scene all too familiar to Meleh, both monarchs left a child to inherit their realm. One would be competent, but be doomed to an early death. The crows started picking on the Zengid Empire, the winner among them being the aforementioned Saladin, the new Kurdish sultan of both Egypt and now Syria. With the Zengids in shambles, Lord Meleh had lost his greatest and only ally, abroad or in Cilicia itself. With Nur ad-Din gone, the Muslim Meleh became a foreigner in his own land. As is tradition, in 1175 the Armenians killed their own cruel ruler. Prince Meleh the Muslim was undoubtedly the most unique and perhaps angriest person to rule Armenian Cilicia, a realm traditionally ruled by rather ruthless Rubinid men. The flicker of his 5-year reign was successful if you count all the land he had won for Cilicia, even if all this land was burnt to a crisp and its civilian population partially massacred. His plights and disregard for his fellow Armenians obviously cloud any justified judgment on Meleh, but I will say that in the long run, his impact cannot be understated for the existence of an Armenian-ruled Cilicia. I hate saying this, but Meleh the Cruel prevented the Crusader takeover of Armenian Cilicia. By overthrowing his nephew and French-born regent, by converting to Islam and attacking the Cilician Templars, by fighting the King of Jerusalem and reconquering the Armenian Principality of Cilicia. When Cilicia was about to become a Crusader puppet, Meleh was there to take it in the complete opposite direction. While his intentions were not good, his impact would be for Cilicia. If you'd like to support this stoic historian, feel free to do so on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. And join Derek Clark, Savak Leo Nazarian, Taj Guilford, Nickmate Voician, Lazarus Dykos, Dave J, and Dalinar. Or become a YouTube channel member, like Derek Clark again, Donald Vincent, what? Why? And Nickmate Voician again. Thank you guys for supporting the channel. I really appreciate it.